Hello, and welcome to Strange Dominions, where we attempt to unlock the mysteries behind the unseen and unheard, unknown and unknowable. I am your host, Octavian Graves. Tonight, Ian and I speak with Frater Barrabbas. Frater Barrabbas has written a book called Talismanic Magic for Witches. It is part of his Four Witches series. We speak on many things, from his beginnings in magic, talismanic magic, how it relates to witchcraft and spellcraft, and much, much more. If you have seen something strange or unusual, such as a cryptid, spirit, UFO, or anything in between, please send us an email at strangedominionspodcast@gmail.com for your chance to be on the podcast. If you are enjoying this content and would like to get extra content, you can become a patron, starting at just $4 a month. With your patronage, you get extra episodes, ad-free content, merchandise, and much more. Thank you so much, and without further ado, we bring you our interview with Frater Barrabbas.
Welcome, listeners, to tonight's episode of Strange Dominions. I am one of your hosts, Ian Burton, and the star and host of the show, Octavian Graves. We are very pleased to introduce the esteemed author and magician, Frater Barrabbas, of the Four Witches series of books. And tonight, we're going to talk about his newest release, Talismanic Magic for Witches. And this is going to be the newest in his series, which merges his 30 years of experience in magic, the occult, and witchcraft. And I've read through this book, and it covers some territory that we are familiar with and a lot of things that we never would have been able to experience and explore without Frater Barrabbas writing this book. And I've had my nose in it for a while now. I'm excited to talk about it. So welcome to the show.
Yes, welcome. We are very happy to have you.
Well, thank you. It's a real honor to be here amongst the two of you. I guess it's. I always enjoy doing interviews, and I always enjoy talking about magic and the occult. Don't get a lot of chance to do that since COVID has sort of kept me indoors a lot and sequestered, especially the previous couple of years. But yeah. Thank you very much for inviting me on the show, and so let's get talking about the stuff that we're really into.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think the first question is, Frater, since you've been at this for a long time, maybe you could give people some background on who you are and how you got started for those who may not know.
Okay. Well, my name is Frater Barrabbas, and actually my magical name is Barrabbas Tiresias. And I started a long time ago. I started probably in maybe 71. So just after 1970, 71, I was about 16 years old. And I was a precocious child who had a sense for phenomena. I could sense things that other people couldn't sense, especially around graveyards or houses that people said were haunted. And I got involved in things like hypnosis and meditation, and it just really blew up and expanded, my ability to perceive things. So I've been able to hear and see spirits, and then later on started actually talking to them. And what happened is that I basically decided that I wanted to become a witch. I didn't quite know what a witch was. There was, obviously some various tabloids and other stuff about, witches and, and then there was Gerald B. Gardner, the old man who basically said that witchcraft was gone. And all of a sudden he came back with another book and said, oh, no, we're actually here, but there's not very many of us left. And, but at any rate, so I chose that path. It just, of all the religious perspectives, it seemed that witchcraft and nature worship were the closest things to my heart. So I started going on that journey. And very early on the way, I ran into an actual deity, a goddess. And, perhaps psychologists could say that I was idolizing women after I hit puberty or whatever, But for me, it was a real reality, and she came to me and talked to me in my head, And when I would, go down, kind of bow down and listen to her, her voice was like the leaves, kind of blowing, and through the streets, and just had that kind of whispering effect. At any rate, I was telling people that I was a witch, so I was a teenage witch in high school, dressed in, Gothic type clothes before it was even a thing. And I just was talking about it, but I was more interested in gaining power and having an effect on people than I was in actually getting serious about my real involvement in witchcraft. And so she came along one of the times when I did some stupid stuff, which back in those days, magically I did a lot of stupid stuff today I would sort of cringe to tell people about, but probably will end up telling some of that to you guys tonight. But at any rate, so she just basically laid down the law on me and said, if you're going to call yourself a witch, then you need to worship me, and if you're going to worship me, these are the rules you need to follow, and in following those rules, I will open up the domain of magic to you and teach you the basics that you need to know. And so that began a very close relationship with her that lasted for, a couple of years. And this is before books were really easily available. So there wasn't really a lot of material that people could use to put together their own system. And there weren't any covens in the area. And besides, getting into a Gardnerian coven is practically next to impossible unless you know somebody or friends of the family or whatever. So she guided me along my path and helped me find resources and to start building my own personalized system of magic, which I built and expanded over many, many decades. And what you're seeing now is the final result of that. I'm an old man now at 68 years old, and many years have passed, and I have a lot more experience and knowledge, and I can take the product of what I started working on a long time ago and basically bring it into manifested form in books, which, I guess are getting to be rather popular. But I don't consider myself a ceremonial magician. I consider myself a witch. It's really kind of funny because when I started to meet up with people who were bona fide ceremonial magicians and all of that, one of them was kind of looking over some of my rituals and said, Brian, or Barrabbas, your magic, your rituals that you're writing, they stink of witchcraft. and I guess, you see, it was said in such a way that it should be, an insult, but I was rather pleased by it. I was like, yeah, they stink of witchcraft. As you should be.
Like, oh,
because I'm a witch. I don't consider myself a ceremonial magician. But anyway, that's kind of where I've been. And the goddess, of course, gave me my names. She gave me the name Barrabbas because I was a troublemaker. I was a rabble rouser. I was always going contrary to what was expected of me, and I was always getting into trouble with my father, who basically was an atheist and thought all the stuff I was involved in was absolute nonsense. And then, and of course, a lot of my friends and acquaintances, I was the kind of guy who you didn't want to introduce to your parents because of the stuff I was into.
Of course.
I don't want you to play with him. He's evil. He's evil.
We very much appreciate the punk spirit on this show. So you fit right in.
Well, because I created my own system of magic, I'm a bit closer to the chaos magicians than I actually am to what I would consider to be traditional ceremonial magicians.
You speak my language there.
Yeah.
I would say the same thing about my practice in some ways, but
yeah. What I've put together is very experiential. So it's not something that yes, I qualified things by doing research and looking at books and checking things later on. But when I first started out, the earliest scribblings that I have on magic and all that, they're taken straight out of my imagination, guided with very few sources. Mm-hmm. she also called me Tiresias because she wanted me to be aware of and to follow a path that would be both, honoring the masculine and the feminine path. Because Tiresias, the seer, got to experience what it was like to be both a man and a woman. It's not that I don't cross-dress or anything like that. Just not into that. It's an art form, and it's really got to be part of your my makeup that you can be a changeling and change yourself like that. And it was never really something that I could do. But on the other hand, I really learned to honor the feminine, not only within myself, but women in the world in general. And that kind of went with my witchcraft magic. So that means that, that I had certain honorifics and certain rules that I followed so that I wouldn't really be an idiot when I encountered women, or as they say these days, be a dick.
Even practically speaking, it's good to learn these things.
Yeah,
and that's the thing. I've noticed that when you really get involved in magic and even spirituality is a serious path, that you crisscross yourself into dimensions that you start off as. You start off as a specific, usually little box, and very quickly, if you're open to it, you expand and you realize there is very much a truth to that we contain all of the universe and all of our polarities within us, and we are expressing it in unique ways depending on who we are.
Yes.
So that's
in witchcraft we call that the powers of light and darkness.
Oh yeah.
Powers of light and darkness are in you.
Absolutely. And then some traditions might say my adepts have our heads in the highest heavens and our feet in the lowest hells.
Yep.
I think at the end of the day, it's an instructive that limitations only limit. And if you are going to be a magician or witch, or just, be that curious seeker in the universe, you can't. Part of that work is removing those limits, knowing when to have them to learn, but removing them as definite walls to who you can and who you must sometimes be, who you could grow into. So thank you.
There are limitations, though. When I was a young witchling, before I was initiated in anything like that, my friends and I were experimenting with LSD.
Oh yeah,
and hashish,
mm-hmm.
and we there was this massive drainage area on the north side of our small town where I grew up, and so it was a confluence of small rivulets and all of that were part of the sewer system, but it was an area that was lower than the rest of the town, and so the town was kind of surrounded around us, and we were in this heavily wooded area. Where there's this drainage area, we used to go down there to collect magical powers and to experience the other world, because you had all the elements there, except maybe for fire. And so one time we were down there, and we were both, my two friends and I were so high, and so that I said, we're gonna fly. We're physically going to levitate and fly in the air, and I bolted, and they followed me, and we ran, trying to get elevated, and then somehow I tripped and fell into the creek, and they fell on top of me, and after I recovered my breath and all of that, I said, wow, I guess we didn't fly.
But so, you learned.
We learned, yes. I mean, there are some things that you can do. You can astral project, and in that domain you can fly. You can fly in your vision, your spirit vision. But physically, you can fly if you get on an airplane.
That is an important thing to learn. So I guess my comment about without limitations should more be stated as Be open so you may learn your true limitations, which are usually more physical than mental.
Or challenge your inhibitions.
It's a good way to put it as well.
Yep.
So you've been around for a long time, as you've mentioned. Now,
Yep.
the 70s, I was not alive in the 70s by any stretch of the term. But that, as I've learned more and more and got the opportunity to read more and more people and study our history as witches and magicians, 70s were a renaissance of a time, and I don't think they realized it at that time. But looking back, there was so much happened in the occult community, and being able to study and yourself, and we're gonna have a moment to talk about the great occultist and magician Jake Stratton Kent, who, as of this publication, has unfortunately passed away and gone on to the Elysian Fields not so long ago. But he was doing amazing work in the 70s as well when he was younger. And a lot of other people, it just feels like so much happened, or the foundations of what many would consider different magical renaissances that are in full bloom even today had their genesis in the 70s. I want to ask you, and you're a witch of good experience, the atmosphere of magic, maybe that's a term that makes sense. I feel year by year, periods of time have their different feelings. They have different sensations in the sense of a magical current, different potentials and themes. What is the difference to you in your memory of that time when you were young in the 70s and the magical landscape of today? And not even so much as the people and the works that are popular, but the underlying foundation and sense of...
Well, people are more cruel today, more callous. There's a lot less compassion. There's a lot less of unity. There's a greater degree of cynicism today. Back in actually, it all really started up in the 60s. And of course, before that with the beatnik period in the 50s.
Oh, yeah.
But the 60s is actually what started it all. And the 70s brought it into fruition until disco came around and everything kind of, all the hippie dreams and all that stuff just sort of went down the toilet. But
I'm fascinated with the time period of counterculture in our history, and then Hunter S. Thompson and the beatniks and Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters, and just that idea of the swelling wave that hit the brakes and then crashed.
The thing you can understand is that the large portion of this group of people were all young. They were all a lot of them were in their 20s, late teens, 20s, and they were like a tribe. And that means that with membership in this tribe, you could walk into a really terrible, ghetto in the middle of a city, and you were a hippie. So, no one bothered you.
Right.
Because you were just a white brother. And also there was just a tremendous amount of optimism and hope that existed at that time, which doesn't really exist that much today. I mean, I'm terribly optimistic, and some people have said unrealistically so.
There's nothing wrong with that, I think.
But back in those days, everybody was looking forward to the future. We were all looking towards the 21st century when the Jetsons would become something that would be a reality, and it didn't. Instead, in the 21st century, we're seeing a lot of fascism and conservative mindset come back. And back in the 60s and 70s, fascism was defeated. Yeah. What some people had problems with was what I would call communism socialism or egalitarianism, and mainly it was the donor class or the propertied individuals who had money, who were part of these, who were basically the movers and shakers of the establishment. But us kids, we didn't see us as being, we saw ourselves as being against the establishment and to stop things like the war in Vietnam and racism. And we basically felt that by the 70s that we were defeating this stuff, and that it would go away and it would not come back. And unfortunately, we were naive about a lot of things. So that should give you. Go ahead.
I was just saying it's interesting just talking about the perspective of hope from the 70s up until now. It was a couple weeks ago and I was feeling kind of low, and so I just decided to Google good news for 2023, and the first article that came up said no good news for 2023.
Oh, no. I mean, that is a pretty unfortunate summary of the vibe in certain ways.
Yeah, but I mean, it's even I'm 27, and even for me, it's very strange to see this global cynicism, and there doesn't seem to be really any light at the end of the tunnel for a mass of people, and it's a very, very strange phenomena to see.
It is disheartening, and I know that for me when I was younger, it wasn't the same as that feeling of the 70s, I'm sure, but there was that, as I matured into my, myself as I would consider a magician and got older, there was that feeling of like, hey, the magic's winning. And there's that sense nowadays where like perhaps the magic isn't not working, but there's a certain element that is lacking in that wonder and hope and empathy. And you're right. Everything you said was absolutely right. And I've always studied the 60s and 70s and the counterculture of that idea. And there was always a line, and I don't remember if it was from Hunter or someone else or from a modern author. And it was a little cynical in itself. And it was basically that, the 60s was humanity's chance to get it right. The last shot we had, and we fucked up. I think it's actually an author I like named Mark Chadbourne. And I don't necessarily agree with that, but I think that is a sentiment of perhaps some of us going into the modern day, even as I know even 5 to 10 years ago, there was talk in communities of peers that, that hope from the 60s that perhaps was immature at the time was being done again and done right.
I've never lost any of that. It had such a powerful impact on me that I carry it with me today.
That's a beautiful thing.
There might be a lot of cynicism, and there might be a lot of negativity, and there might be a lot of people who are saying, oh yeah, man, things are really a mess. But to be honest with you, things have always been kind of a mess. And
it's true.
It just depends on how you want to see it. In the 60s, we ignored an awful lot that was going down. There was really terrible things happening in and around the world, but the press did not fixate it. And I think one of the biggest problems that we have today is that the press really goes and really looks for the most negative things it can find, because those are the things that are, best exemplified. The only problem I've got with the world is as we become more cynical and we lose any sense of hope or any sense of optimism, I think that's going to make magical phenomena more and more incapable of being exercised and experienced. If you don't believe in anything, how are you supposed to be able to experience something that is, subjective? Even though it can be paranormal phenomena, you have to have an open mind and a certain degree of optimism in order to be able to experience something like that.
I hear that, and that's always been a little kind of a lurking fear of mine. And I've always tried to answer it by trying to keep my own heart open and to keep that optimism myself. And you're right. And I think there are, and I think we've had a conversation with this on a previous episode, but if you have any point to why one would do magic in your heart. If anything, it's to keep that sense of wonder and optimism and hope not only alive, but working towards bettering the world as a counterforce to that grayness, as the old Discordians might say. Cannot let gray phase win. And that's important now as it is ever. But
yeah, I kind of feel, though, that something that really disturbs me, I just got through responding to somebody who asked me to magically help them. And I get a ton of this stuff. Most of it
course
just bounces off, and I don't get it. But occasionally I do respond. And there was this one fella who, and I'm not going to name any names, but who basically wanted me to go into the astral or in some other way and collect for him the source of miraculous powers that are in the world, like the Eucharist becoming, blood and flesh in Tixley, Mexico, or in some of the other phenomena of that happening. Or what he wanted me to collect for him in a material sort of way these forces of miracles, so that he could test the limits of magic. And
that's both interesting and so hubristic. So essentially, he wanted to get like the filtered down ephemera of the most miraculous or magical happenstances in the world, so he could poke it and perhaps take advantage of it. But he asked you to do it.
Yeah.
That is pretty heuristic.
And he didn't talk about wanting to pay me. But I don't do magic for money. I don't do magic for strangers. When I do magic, I share it with someone. I work magic with somebody and share the experience with them. That's really where I'm at, because to me, without sharing that, if I give somebody a ritual, they may or may not be able to, acquire the experience as I perceive it. Mm-hmm. If I work magic with them, that element of contagion will make sure that they certainly do sense or feel something, depending upon, how open they are and how sensitive and aware they are. But this fella was practicing the middle pillar, and he was experiencing painful vibrations in his body, and that his family has a history of schizophrenia.
Now that's a whole subject that it does seem to affect very few people, the interaction between certain rituals or even meditations and that kind of thing. And go on.
Yeah. But at any rate, so I basically told him that, that he's looking at this stuff as if it were a distinct quanta that I could, package up for him after I've accumulated it and give it to him. And, from a magical standpoint, I could charge a crystal with something and give him that. But unless he has the ability to receive it in some fashion and perceive it and experience it, then I would be giving him a crystal that as far as he's concerned, would be inert.
Right. It would be like sand through the fingers, water through a sieve. And
people who have magical practitioners for hire who do work for them, in most cases, and I had a really good friend of mine who passed away some years ago, but he was into Voodoo and Santeria, and he was a really old friend of mine. He started out with Circle when they first started, in Madison, Wisconsin. Mm. And but he was African American, and he, sort of went in a different pathway. But he would work magic for people for money. I don't have a problem with that. Somebody wants, if two people want to do that, then that's just fine as far as I'm concerned. But people who have magic work for them in that fashion are focused on the results.
Yes.
As far as the phenomena of magic, they don't care. In fact, they would just assume not have anything to do with that. Things that go bump in the night, they don't want to deal with that. What they want is the results.
That is a distinctive line I've noticed between two camps or mentalities of people. And I tend to think, and that's something that's on my mind a lot because I do know, and I'm friends with or associates with many different sorts of magicians who, and I do know people, some of whom I respect very much, who is, as you say, and I tend to be more of the camp maybe you are, where I'm more about the phenomena, I'm more about the wonder of it and just the journey of it itself. Like what could you possibly get as a result that could trump being in a world of magic and learning all this amazing things just in almost the science of wonder.
I can kind of speak to this a little bit because I'm in the if and court because to me the results do matter. They are important to me. They are something that I very much enjoy. But that's only one side of the coin. It's only 50% of the enjoyment. The other 50% is the phenomena. It is the experience. It is the journey. And I see them being completely tied together. I don't understand people who do magic but only care about the results, nor do I understand the people who do magic and only care about the experience. I see them, one is an aspect of the other, and the other is an aspect of the other one. But that's just where I'm coming from. But I absolutely understand your perspective on, valuing the journey over the destination.
Well, I mean, results are good too, but for instance, one of the things that I did is there's something called the Portae Lucis. I don't know if either of you are familiar with it. There's an obscure French alchemist, Kabbalist magician who came up with that whole concept. And what he did is he used spirogeric alchemy and a combination of evocation and invocation and magic to be able to create a talismanic representation of the three of the Sephira. I think it's the target is Bina. Mm-hmm. And of course, you want to go through Tifereth, which is the sun, and I believe that there's also the moon. So those
probably
three,
Yesod and Malkuth, if it was going down the line.
Yes, so going straight out and arcing up to Bina. And so he calls that the Portae Lucis, and you're supposed to do all of this work, and it's supposed to culminate exactly on the summer solstice, when the gate of light is open. So I created those talismans, but how I did it was much more magically oriented. There are 28 talismanic elementals that I work with. And of course, that's the 7 planets of the ancients, actually 5 planets and the sun and the moon, and then the 4 elements. And so that creates this really nice matrix of, 28 different types of planetary energies that you can work with. And of course, the planet gives it the intelligence of a knowledgeable or an enlightened spirit, and the element, the base element, gives it the body, the energy in which to have its effect. And the two, when they're joined together, create a talisman, which is perpetually operating. So if you take those two forces and basically put them into a metallic talisman object that's marked with the sigils associated with your intent, as well as the seals associated with the entities that you're working with, then what you will create is something that is a spell that is constantly working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And every time, and if you tie in the lunar mansions into that, then what you're going to have then is every time you hit that lunar mansion that talisman was generated, it will have a massive outpouring of energy at that moment. and then it'll die down to just the normal stuff. So what happens, do you think, if you create one talisman to help with your love life and your social life, you create another one that helps with your health and well-being, you create another one that helps you with your career and your economics, and you end up with an array of these talismans, all working for your benefit 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. To me, that is more powerful than any other kind of magic that you can work. I mean, you can conjure a spirit and then establish that spirit through an agreement or a pact, or a continuous period of offering, and basically, have a specific objective in mind. Or you can work with elemental-based energies and do a similar sort of thing, but those two types of rituals have a time limit associated with them, whereas the talisman is timeless. It will continue to operate, and if you give that to your children, it'll continue to operate for them. And if you find a talisman that's buried somewhere, like in a tomb or something like that associated with the ancients, like if you go to Egypt and you happen to run into a talisman somewhere, or maybe someone else dug it up, you can reconstitute that easily, because the baseline charge to that never goes away unless it's physically destroyed. And so that's what I talk about in my book on talismanic magic for witches. But go ahead.
I was going to say, that is rereading, the first few chapters. That is a good emphasis, everything you just say. And you do, for the listeners who do plan to pick up Talismanic Magic for Witches, which I do recommend, everything just stated he's going to expand upon that in far more practical and in-depth detail. So,
anyway,
but as I was going to ask you,
can imagine taking that? Okay, so you've got these talismans. It's just a planet and an element, right? Now, what if you took that metallic talisman and charged into it all 4 elements of those planets? So you have 4 talismanic elementals that are fused into a single talisman, and then you end up having 7 of them, that are based upon the metal of the planet, charged with each one of those 4 element based planets in each of them. Then you have all 7 of these. And
that is
that's a
how do I put that? That is a magical machine, because everything is in essence of the 4 elements in a traditional way. Not only is everything created from them, but it's also the balance. And the idea of a machine working well is a good analogy to determine that everything in creation or existence is a certain mixture and interworking of these 4 elements in their different amounts, different ratios, which is changeable. And also from a magical perspective, and because we're going to talk about rituals like the hexagram ritual, and this is my next question for you, is actually going to be your specific take on doing planetary rituals and how you use the septagram. But before that, it's the idea that all these elements revolve around kind of the axis mundi of spirit in all things. And perhaps from the way you're putting it, in the idea that the planet itself, the planetary power, the archetype of this planet, kind of fills the role of spirit in that pentagrammal way. I don't know if it makes sense, where all of the different parts on all of the worlds, if you're looking at it Kabbalistically, Asya.
I don't.
In essence, all of its parts are working and blessed and well-oiled around that central point to bring the most out of that planet on all its levels of manifestation.
But anyway, having that magical machine, all I did then was just produce a simple sigil of what I wanted, and I had all 7 of these arrayed in a septagram. Put it in the center, and then directed that to one or more of these highly charged metallic talismans and said, "This is what I want." And in doing that, then lo and behold, in a matter of months, these things happen. I mean, I had a house that was a berm house, and I needed to move out of that place. This was in Minneapolis, outside of Minneapolis.
Mm-hmm.
And there was, a lot of people said, "Well, yeah, it's a nice house, but you won't be able to sell it because it's, it's so unusual and it's not a typical home, and those kinds of homes are hard to sell." And plus, so Joni and my wife Joni and I, we put all of this together, and I worked this talismanic magic, and within 5 or 6 months, all of it had come to pass, and we moved. And even all of the obstacles, I mean, we had some massive obstacles, like the septic system had to be completely redone for the house and all this other kind of stuff. We managed to have enough money to pull all of it together and to move to, the new town I live in, Richmond. And all of the obstacles were just made to go away. I mean, it was like we had this clear path. And the thing I'm trying to tell you is talismanic magic will give you a charmed existence. And I don't know any other kind of magic that works in quite that fashion. And of course, if you are a bona fide magical practitioner, you should work all of these forms of magic. You should be able to do spirit conjuring. You should be able to do, energy, advanced energy magic. You should be able to do talismanic magic. And then I've got 2 more books that'll be coming out in this series as well. The one I've finished, which has now been contracted, is going to be called Sacramental Theurgy for Witches. And this talks about all the sacramental stuff. For instance, as a witch, I practice using a magical mass. And I use the mass and the benediction rite, written from my own religious perspective, as powerful rituals to project theurgic energy to wherever I want or need it, whether it's into sacraments or out into the world.
And that is powerful.
Yes.
Before you talk about your other project, tell us a little bit about your personal theology, if you could, how it's been framed throughout your life. And because any magician or witch that I know has their own unique and informed path that they are on, often subjective and experiential. Tell us, if you can, tell us a little bit about, you did a little about having an encounter with a goddess that framed your journey. How has that evolved? How do you look at the world? Tell us a little bit about it.
As a magical practitioner and a witch, I'm also the high priest of my own personal cult. And in that cult, I have lots and lots of different deities. Some of them are the deity of locale, like there might be a really massive tree in my neighborhood that I perceive as a local god. Then I also have my higher self. Some would call the headless one, or your familiar spirit, or whatever you want to call it. That aspect is chief amongst the different icons that are in my magical shrine that I am the priest of. And of course, I give them offerings and food and drink, and I engage with them, and that also includes just a couple of my ancestors, mostly spiritual ancestors, people who I look up to as teachers. Alexander's was one of them. Alexander's was an incredible man who was also quite the scoundrel. And
some of my favorite heroes are.
Anyone who's a magical practitioner should have the 2 worlds very much seamlessly put together. For instance, in the old grimoires, they talk about how you have to have your tools consecrated, by someone saying a mass over them and all that. Well, I do all of that. I can say a mass. I'm a priest, but I'm also a magical practitioner. And to me, they go together and should go together, because to me, working magic is a magical and a religious sort of perspective, and witchcraft really works with that really well. I'm not as certain that a Golden Dawn magician would quite see it in the same way. To be able to function as clergy as well as to function as someone who is, magically capable.
But I think that comes down. You're right. I think it comes down to the nature and character of the practitioner and how long they've been on it and where their path is headed. But I grok that, and I appreciate your answer in that way. Now, because we could talk about religion, but I did want to ask, as in the beginning of your book, and one of my favorite, rituals that I've adapted is, the various hexagram rituals that I've taken out of the lodge context and utilized more hands-on, and it's the focus of some writing I'm doing now. So I'd love to hear your opinion on it, because you've mentioned in the book that now, for the listeners, some of the more classic planetary rituals that you'd find in the OTO or the Golden Dawn or any other offshoot traditions would be things like the lesser, greater, or even supreme rituals of the hexagram, which utilize the hexagram, the six-pointed star, whether unicursally, if you're more thalemically inclined, or just as more people would know it, like the Star of David or the six-pointed star. Not every one of our listeners, I realize, is a full-blown magician. So, and without going into those rituals technically, the six-pointed star is often a focused, and the planets are often associated with different points of that star, and invoked or banished depending on the context and the level of the ritual you're doing. But you do and started to do it a little differently. And I know you did, you learned the basics from the lodge systems, but you quickly realized that there might have been another way you could do it, and you ran with that. Could you tell us a little bit more about how you used a different symbol? And
I'm chuckling because
good. I want to hear about your hexagram rituals. Really.
When I was young, first of all, it's really kind of funny because I've told this story to some of my Thalamic brothers and sisters, because I've been initiated into the OTO, but I only went from 0 to 3rd degree, and I haven't really gone any further. But basically, if you look at the Golden Dawn book, which is now one monster volume.
Talking about Regardi's?
Regardi, yeah. Israel Regardi's book. Mm-hmm. If you try to go into that book and try and figure out how exactly to do a planetary working, I couldn't figure it out.
It can be, yeah.
Yeah.
It could be,
however,
chunky.
I can't remember what Liber it is. Was it Liber? But anyway, Crowley produced his version of that in the Equinox, except he actually really explained how it could be done, which, and of course I didn't have access to that material when I was monkeying around with this stuff. I had the Golden Dawn, so I said, I couldn't pick it up from, Israel Regardi's book, so I just basically tossed it and came up with my own thing. Now the problem is that I really liked the septagram. To me, the septagram is really sexy. I mean, it's really cool because it's obscure. You don't see septagrams all over the place. Later on,
you're not wrong.
I got into octograms and octagons and enneagrams, and
So the octagons are cute, but you're definitely a septagram kind of guy.
But octagon is for elemental work, and if you have as your base an elemental working, and then you superimpose upon it a septagram, for the 7 different planetary associations with a hypothetical spirit personality, and you fuse the two together, so you have you have an elemental envelope, and then upon it, the personality of the spirit that you are trying to invoke, with all 7 of its planets defined astrologically, you will then have given birth to a spiritual entity that conforms to your expectations. But at any rate, the septagram is almost impossible to draw in the air unless you've got a really good, powerful ability to visualize.
I have actually tried this, and you are correct. It is, as we'd say, a bitch to do. But it's interesting, and it does seem to be almost, I can't think of my word, but logical, because you have 7 classical planets, and you have a 7-pointed star as opposed to a 6-pointed star. And I do think that, people don't think about it, but you should. Like, hey, why not? These things do match up pretty well. Let's see if it works.
And if you're going to advance your planetary magic to include either 9 of the planets or 11, if you consider Earth, then you're talking about an even more complex star. And these complex stars, because they're really difficult to draw, I think hexagram is probably the least difficult, because you're drawing 2 triangles, or you're drawing a series of lines. If you're using the unicursal hexagram, what I ended up doing was basically painting an elaborate septagram on a piece of wood.
Yeah, I was reading about that, and there's one of the things I wanted to ask you, because it seemed, if I'd caught what you'd been doing from your writing, it seemed rather ingenious. But go on, I want to hear about this, because this seemed like it might be not only efficient, but kind of a work saver.
Well, what I do is I work with the central altar, and I use this. It's kind of like a giant icon. I call it a septagrammic, icon, and the background of it is black, and so you've got the septagram painted on it, decorated, and however you want to do it, with spirit names, or there's all sorts of examples of how to do this. But the idea is that you have the planets defined at the points, and then you can take your wand. When you're in the center of the circle, when you've established all of the external structures, including the gateway that you've entered into, and you are now in the Holy of Holies, and there's a central altar, and it has on it the icon of the septagram, then you can draw the invoking lines for that septagram to invoke a specific planetary intelligence.
Right. Now, that was my question. So normally in the classic rituals, you'd basically go to the quarters and visualize and trace and empower your different hexagrams based on what you're doing. So, but the method you use, do you still do the tracing and the visualization in the quarters, or do you utilize that central icon and kind of just use that as your baseboard to project that onto?
You could technically, but there's a gateway structure that's in the circle, which is a triangular structure. I mean, the gateways I work with and the triangles I work with are in the circle with me, not out there somewhere, because the kind of magic I work is all internal. I mean, to me, the magic circle is a boundary for the sacred. I saw something that was really kind of funny to me, or strange. It was a picture of this one couple who were in a Stonehenge type parkway, in England somewhere, where they actually had the standing stones and all of that, and they had drawn a circle in this, and they were standing in it. One had his wand, and I'm thinking to myself, why would you need to draw a circle in something that is completely and totally sacred and other?
It doesn't need it. The circle is to make that space.
It's superfluous, and this is the problem I have with outdoor magic in a grove, because it's different than indoor magic in a temple. I mean,
we could talk about it, because I love outdoor magic, and me and Octavian, we often discuss the benefits and uses of in our preferences in either or. And I've always, perhaps because I've always had roommates or family, I've always been inclined to, find groves and quiet places that resonate magically with me to do them. But and I didn't mean to cut you off. Continue your train of thought, please.
The next book that's coming out, Sacramental Theurgy, has in it what I would call Godhead personification, kind of like the there was a Robin of Sherwood series that came out some time ago that had a character named Hearn, the Horn God, and he would come out of the forest with his horns, rack of horns, and he had this thing over his head, and he could see through his eyes, but it was actually the head of a deer or a stag. And it had these massive horns out and all that. And then the fog was wrapped around him. And he would say, "The powers of light and darkness are with you, Robin of Sherwood."
Oh, that's cool.
And it would make all the hair on my plot stand on end. I mean, I was like, wow. But there are people now who have dedicated their lives to being that kind of person. But at any rate, a grove is part of that magic of Godhead personification, and so is the Grand Sabbath, where you have literally a community of people coming together to celebrate, this kind of outdoor grove-based magic within a collective group. But anyways, getting back to the septagram is impossible to draw. So I mean, the ritual that I do is actually it's basically in 3 parts, or it's actually 4. In the outer section of the magic circle is where you are basically defining the energy basis for the talismanic complex. And so the outer area is associated with, like the 4 watchtowers and the 4 angles. You're working with an element, a power structure within that area. And then, of course, you have a gateway that allows you to go into an inner circle. And in that, once you've passed through that, then you're invoking the planetary aspect that's going to go with the energy field. And then there's there's another ritual that you work at, as you're going through these layers within a vortex type structure.
That was another point in your book that I wanted to bug you about. Perhaps in the second part of in our Patreon episode, we can highlight a few of those in more detail. But continue. But I did recognize your use of the term vortex.
As an energy field, if you want to experience phenomena, I mean, really just bizarre stuff, work with the vortex. It's guaranteed to get you to experience things like time dilation, where you start your working and then you finish it and you look at the clock and 5 or 6 hours have gone, and for a fact that was not the case. Or just the opposite. You can go and do an elaborate ritual and then come out of it and only an hour has passed. You're like, that's impossible. Yeah, well, it's time dilation.
I have experienced it.
Yes.
So that is, I will absolutely, if I take advantage and practice some of the techniques you have in your book, as same as Octavian, I will definitely throw you feedback.
Get this one then.
No, they're on my list.
Oh, okay.
I, like many magicians, have a list that's bigger than my wallet.
Yeah.
But we'll get there. And now that I've read through yours, they are pretty far to the top of it, because I have to read and practice what you wrote before.
Right. That last ritual, though, is where you actually take the spiritual intelligence from the planet and the element base, and you fuse them together into a metallic talisman.
Now that is interesting to me. One of the works that I've been going on for about 6 months now is to define and kind of pull apart technically and really learn more of the hierarchy, the assumed hierarchy, or if you want to call it a hierarchy, between the different authoritative powers or emanating. What's the word I'm looking for? Kind of the order of emanation, if you want to look at it that way, between essentially like your source or your Godhead to, your archangels, to your Olympic spirits, to your, on the planet, where those planetary powers are coming from, how they're shaped, and in what order, because it's, you have that in your book as well. That's important, specifically when you're working with talismans. So when you say that merging those two forces of the spiritual intelligence and the elemental, I get what you mean there. And you're kind of doing the as above, so below thing in perpetuity, if I'm getting what you're going correctly here. So
once you've charged that talisman and you incubate it for 3 days, then what you've got is after you reveal it, is a magical artifact that will continue to function until you destroy it, or it gets destroyed physically. That means that to take a talisman and to destroy it means that you take it and you take out a hammer and a chisel and you break it into fragments. You burn it, and then you bury it.
I have a talisman, one of the Jupiterian talismans from the key right here, actually.
Yeah.
That was right on my desk. It needs to be polished and cleaned a little bit. That's why it was in front of me.
And I wear my fifth talisman of Venus every day. And this is a perfect place to end for the main show and go over to the patron show. But for our main show listeners, could you tell everyone where to find you and your book?
Well, I have a blog that you can find me, and that's Frater.Barrabbas .blogspot.com. And the other place that you can find me is there's an author website called Frater.Barrabbas.com. And also you can find me on Llewellyn. But there's one book that you won't find there, and that's this one right here, which is one of the main books that I wrote before I wrote the books for Llewellyn. And that book you can find on Amazon. I have no problems with people shopping on Amazon.
Well, tell us about that book, because we are a listener. We have our videos up for us and for YouTube, and that is Ritual Magic.
It's called Mastering the Art of Ritual Magic, or I call it MARM for short. And this has in it a complete system of working magic. From the very beginning concepts that you need to know all the way down to self-initiation. Everything that you need is in there.
Good.
And but it doesn't get too far into, it doesn't work with elementals. It works with something I call qualified elementals. And that is if you have, I know that you're more into Kabbalah than I am, but even though I wrote a book on the Kabbalah called The Magic Kabbalah for Beginners. Anyway, if you have, let's say, a Sephiroth, like let's say Bina,
mm-hmm.
And then you have the element of fire. That would be like the Three of Wands in the tarot.
Yes. Yep. So it would be essentially, if you looked at it from that Kabbalistic worldview, it would be Bina and Atziluth.
Yes.
So,
and what I like to do is actually use the approach that I use the Pythagorean system instead of the Kabbalah, because that's where the Kabbalah, the Sefer Yetzirah, that was taken from Neo-Pythagoreanism from that
absolutely.
period. But at any rate, but yeah, the qualified powers are 1 through 10 of the 4 elements, and those are the 10 attributes or numbers of deity, of the elements from spirit, from union all the way down to the multiplicity of 10.
Yep, and that's how I would understand it. Listeners, thank you for listening.
And that was our interview with Frater Barrabbas. We loved having him on the show, and we cannot wait to have him on again for his future writings. I urge everyone to go pick up a copy of Talismanic Magic for Witches and all the rest of the books in the Four Witches series. Thank you all again for being here and listening, and we will see you again on the Strange Dominion.